Welcome to The Torch, a new podcast from the Riverside County Office of Education, where we take a closer look at the issues that matter the most to our educators and families. I'm Dr. Edwin Gomez, and as the Riverside County Superintendent of Schools, I am passionate about examining topics and elevating practices that bring innovative solutions to education's most challenging issues.
Hi, I'm Dominique Samario, the Administrator of Community Engagement and Partnerships at the Riverside County Office of Education. Here on The Torch, our goal is to highlight topics that our educators and families are talking about and explore them with education thought leaders. That's where our guest comes in. I am very honored to have Jeff Vaca, RCOE's Chief Governmental Relations Officer. Jeff is here from our Sacramento office, and he is truly one of the most well-versed individuals on all things state of California legislation, education policy, and the state budget. So Jeff, it is so good to have you here today. Thank you for being on The Torch.
Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here.
So I mentioned to you at the beginning that we dive into topics that people are talking about. And right now, people are definitely talking about the state of California's budget. So we really want to get into that. But before we do, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you, your background, and kind of what brought you to this role.
Sure. As much as I hate to self-identify as a weird kid, I think I probably was. I was really interested in politics from a very young age. I can still remember when I was 8 years old, 1968 presidential election. Couldn't wait to get home on Wednesday afternoons because that was when Time magazine would come in the mail, and I would read about what was going on. It was a very close election that year between Nixon and Humphrey. My parents let me stay up until 11 p.m. that year. And back then, of course, you didn't have results like we do now. So then even as I went into middle school, I remember writing a term paper about the Watergate scandal. I was very interested throughout high school, and then in college was a political science major. And you learn a lot, but you don't always learn what's applicable to the work that you do. And so after college, was taking some graduate courses, and like a lot of the folks that work at or around the state capitol, had an internship over the summer with California State University Office of Governmental Affairs, and that ended up being the first job that I had, the first paying job in the advocacy area. And so the rest, as they say, is history. I've been in education advocacy since 1991.
Well, there are so many things I loved about that first response, but as the unit that leads the Riverside County Office of Education's internship program, I love that your first job and a job that really kind of laid the foundation for your career started off as an internship. So
Well, it's
very
it's
cool.
it's essential, and honestly, for folks at the Capitol, it's also kind of a source of cheap labor.
Especially back, a lot of new labor laws now, and we're
Yes.
doing much better things for our interns. And I've heard tons of stories where, our interns here go on to do great things in education and public policy. And so we'll have to cover that topic on another episode. But, we touched on it at the beginning. When you're looking at the news, if you're in the state of California, you're hearing about the budget. And we've been
Right.
hearing about it for some time. I think what's really changing, though, is the number that's in front of the word deficit for the state. And I think that, I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of where we're at in terms of the state budget, but more importantly to our audience
Right.
is understanding, I think many people know that the state, that budget is directly tied to our schools and our school district budgets. So when you're talking about a huge budget deficit for the state, what is that meaning for our students and for our educators?
Well, so think of it this way: schools are almost like uh, connected at the hip with the state when it comes to the amount of revenues and the amount of that's available to spend in school districts and county offices of education and charter schools. Voters passed Proposition 98 in 1988. It provides a guarantee of funding, but it was never about providing adequate funding. I think a lot of people probably thought, well, what we're voting for is ensuring that our schools have everything that they need to succeed. But the way that it works, and we could spend 3 hours talking about the intricacies of Proposition 98, but right now we are in what is called Test One. And what that means is that as state revenues go up and down, so do Proposition 98 revenues. So we've been on a really good run for the past better part of a decade where funds going to schools have been increasing on a year-to-year basis. And now we have more or less hit the wall. The state, depending on who you ask, has somewhere between a 38 and 78 or $73 billion deficit. And schools are going to be impacted by that one way or another. There's just no way around it.
When you talk about the 3-hour episode, we might dive into that. That'll be like a special feature, in the future. But as you mentioned, I mean, they're so intricately tied. And I think, something to just touch on when we say things that people are talking about. One of the things that's been in the news in the past was kind of this story that schools almost had too much money. They didn't even know what to do with it. But I think there are some layers behind that. I mean, I don't think that people really thought at the school level, yeah, you know what, we're good. Like
Right.
we've got everything we need and more. So, tell us about that because I think sometimes those headlines can be misleading.
Yeah, we had this really unusual period um, during the pandemic because if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, it really looked like the state's economy was going to go off of a cliff. And so folks with the Department of Finance, which prepares the budget for the governor, the legislative analyst who provides fiscal advice to the members of the legislature, they're all saying things are going to get really bad. Well, it didn't turn out that way. And then we had, because of the shutdowns with schools being closed for an extended period of time, there was a lot of funding from both the state and the federal level for what we would generally call learning recovery, because we knew that as good as some school districts were doing remote education, online education, it's just not the same as being in the classroom. So there was a lot of money coming from both the state and federal governments, but the thing about that funding is that it was all one-time funding. And so districts, county offices, charter schools had to be really thoughtful and really think hard about their plans, because the one thing that our fiscal division at Riverside County Office of Education always drums into folks is you don't use one-time funds for ongoing expenditures. And now we're at the point where all of that stream of one-time funding is about to run out. We're starting to hit the deadlines in 2024. And, folks have started some programs. The state has provided funding for expanded learning before and after school. And now all of a sudden we're in a completely different atmosphere where now folks are wondering, are we going to be able to sustain these programs as we move forward? Are we even going to be able to keep the staff that we have now in order to provide those services and programs to students?
It kind of sounds, unfortunately, like this perfect storm where you had those one-time monies coming to an end, and that was probably, predetermined. There was that length of time that they were
Right.
allotted. Ideally, I'm sure nobody would have wanted a, billions of dollar deficit to happen at that same time that the monies are ending. So I think, is this making it harder on our school districts?
I think it's making it harder because, um, the other piece of this additional funding was that there was a lot of reporting and a lot of plans that were required. In our educational services division, the accountability and assessment unit, they have a document that they prepare every year that's called Plans, Templates, and Statutory Deadlines. And you can figure out the acronym for that. And it's an enormous amount of work. And, no one's going to say no to additional funding in order to serve students. But the time that district staff are spending on preparing plans and reports, some that go to the legislature, some that go to their local governing boards, it's gotten to the point where some people, kind of jokingly refer to it as the plandemic, because there's just so much to do. And if, really talented people are spending all of their time writing plans, then they're not in the classroom or they're not providing other services to students. So it's just, I think you used the term perfect storm. It's these expectations. It's that we still have not fully recovered in terms of test scores and other metrics from that loss of learning during the pandemic. And now here we are with one of the worst deficits that we've faced, certainly in over a decade, probably longer than that.
Everything. I thank you for your insight, first of all, because I think it's really important. And I think you lay a really clear picture as to, some of the layers of reasons why we are where we are. It's not, just this quick thing that happened or, you know, um, people not looking ahead. There were many reasons that we're in this position. But that being said, it can be a little bleak, right? It can feel heavy when you think, but this is, my student is going to school, my child, I'm a teacher, I'm trying to provide everything I can. And now we have these cuts and our possible cuts. Um, you know, when people are listening, we want them to feel empowered, though.
Right.
Are there things that our educators can do? Are there things that our families can do? Can they advocate? Can they let the state know that, there are long-term repercussions when we aren't funding our education system appropriately?
There is a lot that folks can do at the local level. I think people have the sense that sometimes they have to go to Sacramento in order to have an impact on the outcome of some of these conversations that take place, because that's where the hearings are, that's where the votes are taken. But every member of the legislature also has a local district office. And there's nothing that members of the legislature like more than visiting a school to see a program that's working really well. So what we advise our districts here in the county is to please get your members into your schools. Show them the good work that you're doing. Show them how you're serving students. Show them how you're using the dollars that they have allocated to you. And the parents and families can do the same thing. And for the most part, I think the district offices are very good at listening to folks. One of the things that our office does in Sacramento, if one of our local legislators gets an inquiry from a parent, family member, they usually reach out to us, and then we work with whether it's an RCOE question or one of our districts in finding the answer. So there is that potential for two-way communication. And it's important because the narrative all too often becomes one of failure, where test scores are low, we're failing our students, there isn't sufficient access to, for example, A to G courses. So it's really important to turn around that narrative at the local level and show elected officials, and that this can be more than members of the state legislature. These are the great things that we're doing, and these are the great things that our students are doing. Will there be challenges? Sure, because there's always challenges. But I think, unfortunately, what gets lost all too often is that great work that's taking place, probably at every school district in the state.
I couldn't agree more. One of the things here, I know you know this, at Riverside County Office of Education is celebrating student success because it's happening every day. There are these amazing programs, these amazing student stories. And so it's such an honor. It is truly one of our focus areas where we say, we want to celebrate this. We want to tell those stories because all too often, and it's not just the case of education, the story that people click on, the story that gets told is maybe that kind of a little bit more negative one, a more shocking headline, and that's the nature of the beast, and that's okay. But it is our job to make sure that those positive stories are being told. And so I think, like you mentioned, kind of empowering our families, empowering our educators to tell those stories is really great, and it makes us feel good too to remind ourselves there's good work happening,
Right. And
right?
that's, I think all of the folks that do education advocacy, they got into it. I think the term lobbyist sometimes has a bit of a negative connotation, like I'm walking around with, you know, handfuls of cash in my jacket or whatever. Um, no one went into education advocacy to make $1 million. It's because you feel like you're doing good work. And both of my parents were educators, aunts, uncles, the entire family. So, in some small way, I feel like this is my contribution to that family history, even though I have never actually taught in a classroom and would probably be scared to death to try to do so.
It's not a small contribution though, so don't downplay it. You're doing amazing work, and so one of the things that your office does, and the work that you're doing day in and day out, is sort of looking ahead and what's on the radar. And so, before we finish here today, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what should we be paying attention to. Of course, the budget, which will
Right.
all be, and thank you for providing that background. But what should we be looking at in terms of, kind of our families, but also our educators? What should they have their pulse on?
Well, this will be an interesting year because there's never a shortage of ideas, and the difficulty in a bad budget year like the one that we're in now is that most good ideas cost money. But I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a bill, Assembly Bill 2222, that has to do with the science of reading. And it would make a good case study, I think everyone agrees that literacy is really important. Literacy by fifth grade is one of Dr. Gomez's initiatives here in Riverside. Uh, the bill makes a lot of would make a lot of significant changes, not just in instructional materials, but in the way that reading is taught. A little bit going back to we have wars from time to time over phonics versus whole language, different approaches to teaching reading. The other thing that the bill would do, it would actually uh, require the institutions of higher education to use the science of reading as the way they're training their teachers. And having worked at the CSU for as long as I did, over a decade, I know that sometimes change at those institutions comes more slowly than one would like. So we get a lot of bills where the overall goal is great. And then, kind of our role is to, well, let's maybe temper expectations a little bit and let's figure out how to make this work at the local level in a way that works both for the people that are doing the work, the teachers and principals, et cetera, but most importantly, obviously, for the students.
That's great. I'm so glad that you're doing that work because as we've been talking about, they're great ideas often, but it's in the implementation, it's in those details that it may not always have the intended impacts.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a bill that RCOE is actually co-sponsoring this year with our colleagues at the Alameda County Office of Education. And the bill is focused on some of the students that we serve in county offices in the juvenile court schools. And the goal of the bill is to ensure that students that are in those programs, educational programs, while they're in juvenile hall, have the opportunity to take additional courses beyond the minimum statewide graduation requirements. What we've felt for a long time is that all too often, uh, minimum requirements does not necessarily translate into success either in the workforce or going on to higher education. So we're hopeful that with this bill that will provide county offices like ours a little more flexibility to ensure that these students have access to these additional courses, that it will make it much more likely that they will in fact succeed in life. And that's Assembly Bill 2181
I love that. Thank you for
by
bringing that up.
Assemblymember Gibson.
Thank you. That's great work, and we've got our fingers crossed then for that. Thank you for your efforts on those. So as we close today, we have a little ending. We're going to call it our fire round. We'll play off the
Okay.
torch, name. And it's going to be 3 questions.
Okay.
The goal, although not always attainable, is to answer them with a 1-word or 1-sentence response. But, we'll say give or take, right? 2 of them we ask every guest, and 1 of them is custom just for
Okay.
you. So to start, who was your most impactful teacher?
I would say my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Zarzana. And we called ourselves Zarzana Zombies. And I think one reason it was the most impactful is that was the last year that he taught before he became a school principal. And so he made an effort to stay in touch with a lot of us. And because my father was also a school principal, they didn't know each other really well, but they sort of knew each other. So we kind of kept track with each other through the years. And then the last time that I saw him, I'm a big San Francisco Giants fan. And the Giants have this program where they bring in basically old guys to be the ball boys. And Mr. Zarzana was a ball boy at a San Francisco Giants game. And so when I saw that, it was just like bringing back, memories from, I shouldn't admit this, 52 years ago. So I was Mr. Zarzana.
I love that. I hope he's listening. That would be amazing. It would be amazing. What's your favorite book?
Now that's a hard one. So I'm going to go, I usually have 3 or 4 that I juggle back and forth, but I'm going to go with Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, which is, sort of an epic story, cattle drive, became a famous miniseries with Robert Duvall and Tommy Lee Jones. There are parts of that book. I don't read the whole book every year because it's like 1,200 pages
It's a
long.
big book, yeah.
But there are parts of it that I definitely try to read every year because I enjoy it so much.
I love that. The power of literature and literacy. So finally, this question is customized just for you.
Okay.
People may or may not know, but Jeff is a big, music fan and music aficionado, really. And so, if you were to describe the state of the state's budget right now, give us a song that you would use to
Okay,
kind of
I'm going to give
capture
you
that.
2 songs.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
One was a big hit, big hit by the OJs back in the 70s called For the Love of Money. And then because there's just so much going on right now, and it's hard to keep up with, I'm going to choose a song by the Police called Too Much Information. Because
There is.
sometimes it's just, I just want to go home.
Yes. We don't blame you for that, but thank you for staying. Thank you for staying in the fight. Thank you for staying engaged. And thank you for your time here today and truly for sort of breaking down these things. I think so often it's almost like another language, and we kind of can almost turn it off because it feels too nuanced, too detailed. And so really appreciate your insight and sharing concrete ways that we can all, whichever place we're in our lives, advocate for what we think is best for our students, which is what we're all trying to do, right? So
Right.
really appreciate your time.
No, thank you. Wonderful to be here. Wonderful to be a part of RCOE.
Absolutely. And thank you for listening in. The Torch is a monthly series from the Riverside County Office of Education. So make sure that you follow us on YouTube or wherever you stream your podcasts. We're excited for all of the discussions that will take place on this show and to support our families, our teachers, and everyone passionate about delivering the very best for our students.